Good afternoon. I'd like to call the Planning and Development Committee meeting of June 6, 2023 to order. First off, any disclosures of interest? Seeing none. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of the First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendoronk, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The regional municipality of Niagara and the town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. I just need a mover and seconder for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Member Potter, second by Member Drew. Moved by Member Potter, second by Member Drew. Resolved that the Planning and Development Committee agenda for June 6, 2023 be approved. All in favor? It's carried. We have Ron Triccarelli as a delegation. Is Ron here?
Ron? Yeah.
All right, Ron, welcome, and you can take the podium.
My name's Ron Triccarelli, and I own the property on 301 Main Street West. I'm asking for an extension on redevelopment. There was a house on this property. I tore it down about 5 years ago. Before I tore it down, I met with the NEC member and what I was proposing to do, and to replace the house exactly where the old one was. So he said that was fine. He said, if you intend on cutting any trees, make sure you clear it with your along the property line with your neighbors, and which, you know, that was pretty reasonable. And when you apply to redevelop, make sure you send us a copy of what you're going to be doing, so we're aware, you know, that what you're going to be developing. That was 5 years ago. We went through all this COVID and that, and you know, we just we didn't even try to do anything because, I mean, the economy and everything wasn't, you know, we didn't know where it was going to end up. So now we're ready to go ahead with it, but our 5 years was up May 31st. So probably about a month ago, through talking to NEC, that I need a permit from them. So I provided them everything that I have here, which I have for the building department, for a permit. And so Kendra Hendrick, you know, Andrea, well, her first name is Kendra. She's in the planning department with the NEC. And so going back and forth with her, you know, finally cleared up everything, that the information was all on the site plan and everything, but anyway, finally made a complete application. So, you know, I asked her how long this was going to take, because our 5 years is up. She says, oh, Ron, she says, it could take up to a year. So I don't know what all the delay is for, because there was a house on this property before. Anyway, she was very nice and that. It's like, well, let's just see. She's got everything now. I try to get this application into the building department, but they can't accept it until I clear with the NEC. So this is where I'm stuck, that, you know, I'm asking for an extension. You know, it could be a month, it could be a year, because they haven't told us. They just said that according to Kendra, she said that it could take up to a year. So I wasn't aware of this. And like I said, the delays, you know, I shouldn't have left it all this long, but with the COVID and that, and the way the economy was, you know, it didn't look like it was feasible to do anything with the property at the time.
Well, Yeah, we understand there were certainly extenuating circumstances that haven't happened, at least in 100 years, with the pandemic. So we have a resolution to extend. Any discussion from committee members about how long we'd like to extend it? I know you said it might take up to a year.
That's what,
So probably, my opinion, extending it for 2 years would give you enough buffer time. I don't know if you feel good about that, or the committee feels okay about that.
Yeah, I have no, as long as it takes, I mean, if it takes, it's no point in giving him 6 months or a couple of months, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Because he'll be back and forth every few months asking for another extension, so we may as well give him a good extension to begin with. I don't know what that is. I don't know if anybody in staff can help us understand what is going on and what normally is the situation with something like this, I mean, with NEC. I don't understand why he has waited so long already. Matt, I'm looking at you. Or somebody. Can somebody...
Paul, maybe you'd be the
Paul?
best to answer. I do know that the NEC, it takes a long time. And Walter's here, I see. So Walter, do you want to take it?
Thank you, through you, Mayor. It's my understanding that the Niagara Escarpment Commission, in terms of if it's an application that has to go through the board for a decision, it takes considerable amount of time, primarily because of volume of work that they have and the limited staffing that they have. So it's just simply volume and staffing. That's my understanding, anyway.
So, Walter, you think that 2 years is long enough to give for an extension?
Yeah, that should be more sufficient if the application's been made already. So, yeah, that should be more than sufficient. Yeah.
So this is all based on NEC delay. I mean, when I say delay, I don't say that in a negative way, but it's because of, and you're saying it's because of volume of applications they have. Is that it? Okay, I have no problem with 2 years. From my perspective, I think we need to give the gentleman as much time as he needs. So yeah, I'm okay with that.
you see, this is the complete application right here. I have it. It's all filled out. Everything is all in place for it. So, you know, I'd be ready to file it with the building department, but they said they can't accept it until the NEC. And Kendra, she said, I didn't know that I needed this permit until that I talked to her. She said, Ron, everything has changed since the COVID. Now everything's taken so much longer. If it's the work, you know, the workload that they have, I'm not sure.
Member Potter?
Thank you. We're still suffering the consequences of COVID, obviously, but I also think we have to be pragmatic in our solutions and move forward expeditiously. My only request, I would support a 2-year extension. I think that's a reasonable time. But I think the onus is also on you, where possible, to expedite the process as well, to make sure that, you know, you're I wouldn't say aggressive, but you are actively encouraging the various jurisdictions, NEC or whoever, to expedite your process. So there is some onus on you as well, as all citizens, to vouch for themselves and actually push forward. But I'd support a 2-year, Mr. Mayor.
I will check with Kendra even tomorrow just to see, you know, how far the application is.
All right, I have a resolution here. Well, resolved that the Planning and Development Committee recommend the 5-year building timeline for 301 Main Street West be extended to June 1st, 2025 for approval by council.
Mover and second.
Mover, Member Drew. Seconder, Councillor Frake. Moved by Member Drew, second by Councillor Frake. Resolved that the Planning and Development Committee recommend the 5-year building timeline for 301 Main Street West be extended to June 1st, 2025 for approval by council. All in favor? That's carried. We just need a mover and seconder to receive the delegation. Moved by Member Potter, second by Member Frake. Moved by Member Potter, second by Member Frake. Resolved that the delegation from Ron Ticciarelli be received. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Have a good evening, Mr. Ticciarelli. Up next, we have a discussion report, PA 2319. Just a mover and seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Member Drew, second by Member Potter. Michaela? Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, Mayor Jordan, councilors, members of the Planning Standing Committee. My name is Michaela Bray, planner with the town. I'm here to present report number PA 2319. It's an official plan amendment and a zoning bylaw amendment at 9 Windward Drive. So here today, I also have the consultants for MHBC Planning, Oz Kamal and Stacy Kurzakowski. They'll be doing a presentation following mine. So the location of the site, it's on the south side of Woodward Drive. It directly abuts the MTO lands of the Toronto-bound on-ramp for the QEW. Currently, the lands are vacant. This aerial photography is a bit outdated. It just shows the previous model home design center that was on the site. So the proposed site plan, I'm going to leave most of the details to MHBC Planning in their presentation, but just some key points. They're proposing a 10-story building. There'd be employment generating uses on the first 2 floors, with the remainder being residential. The total number of residential units is 121, making up 14,260 square meters of gross floor area. The remaining gross floor area, 1,926 square meters, would be for employment generating space. And this equates to about 11.9% of the total building GFA to be for employment generating uses. And this is a comparable number to the ratio of residential to employment generating uses at the nearby 13 Windward Drive, which is about 12.4%. There's also 250 parking spaces proposed. It's a mix of surface and underground parking. So just a timeline of the process so far. So the pre-consultation, which is an internal meeting with staff and review agencies, such as the region, the MTO, the Escarpment Commission, if required, the Conservation Authority, just a standard set of attendance. That was back in July 2022. From there, the applicant prepared their submission, which we received in December. Since December, it's been circulated for both public and the technical review by town departments and external agencies. All the received submission documents were posted on the town's website on the current planning applications webpage. The first public open house was in February 2023 and was followed by the public meeting in April. So since then, staff have continued to review and have prepared a recommendation report being heard tonight. And then from here, we'll go to council for the final decision. So I'll go over some of the planning policy. So the Niagara region, on behalf of the town, reviews the relevant provincial and regional policy. And they send us their comments. They were of the opinion that the proposed development was compliant with any of the relevant provincial and regional policies. So I'll go to the official plan. So currently, the subject lands are designated a mixed-use residential in the official plan. The policies and objectives of this were included in the planning report that was circulated in the agenda. And then the neighborhood, or the lot is also within the Winston Road Neighborhood Secondary Plan, where within its zone or designated mixed-use high density, and the lands are also subject to an employment overlay. So the employment overlay was the result of the implementation of the secondary plan, and that was an amendment to the already implemented official plan. The purpose of that employment overlay is to reserve the lands, particularly the ones along the QEW corridor for employment-generating uses, which is outlined in section 11.3.3.2H of the official plan. And it's important to note the employment overlay only applies to the use of the land. That underlying mixed-use high-density designation I mentioned earlier, those provisions still apply to the lands. And then, again, these policies were included in the staff recommendation report that was circulated with the agenda for your reference. The current zoning of the subject lands is neighborhood development. There's also a site-specific that is active on the site. That was to permit that modular home company design center that no longer exists but was previously there. The neighborhood development zone is fairly restrictive. It only recognizes as existing uses and standards as permitted. So we'll go into the proposed official plan amendment. So what the applicants are proposing to do is to amend that section 11.3.3.4H of the Winston Road Neighborhood Secondary Plan in the official plan. And the amendment would be to permit residential uses within that employment area. The applicants are also proposing a rezoning from neighborhood development to a mixed-use high-density residential with the site-specific policy number to be determined. The site-specific policy would allow some additional permitted uses, an accessory showroom, clinic, convenience store, food store, fitness studio, pharmacy, retail store, and live-work units. I've noted the live-work unit use was recently added since the public meeting, just to capture that as a permitted use as well. The site-specific policy would also allow some modified zoning standards. I'll let the consultants go into detail, but to reduce the front yard, reduce the underground parking garage setbacks. We're still kind of in discussion if these are required, because typically the zoning standards are from ground to sky. So they would only be from grade and above. So we're just working out those details still. Also to increase the building depth as well as have standardized parking ratios. So for the employment generating commercial area, it would be one space for every, that should say 28 square meters of employment and commercial gross floor area, and 1.5 spaces for each residential unit, and that would be inclusive of visitor parking. There would also be site-specific policy for 12 accessible spaces. So I'll go into the planning review. So I'll start with land use. So I've got two of the designations on the screen, that residential mixed-use area as well as the mixed-use uses in the Winston Road Neighborhood Secondary Plan. They've got similar intents to provide development in the mixed-use form in areas that are ideal for a mix of residential, retail, commercial, and employment. The Winston Road neighborhood, in particular, their intent is for a vibrant, walkable neighborhood with a range of housing and employment options. So planning staff are of the opinion that the proposed 10-story mixed-use building appropriately complies with the objections of the official plan. We note that through optimization exercises, the applicants have identified an appropriate configuration that considers the lot size parking requirements, like future growth expectations, as well as principles of efficient and appropriate intensification. Further, planning staff are of the opinion that the employment generating to residential breakdown ratio of that 11.9% is appropriate and is comparable to the ratio at the nearby 13 Windward site, which the ratio is about 12.4%. So planning staff are satisfied that this gross floor area, it's keeping with the spirit of the employment overlay, as this employment generating use is still being provided along the QEW on the first 2 stories. And we're also of the opinion that the residential use also improves the compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood. And then just for the zoning, so again, rezoning from neighborhood development to mixed-use high-density. Planning staff are of the opinion that the mixed-use high-density zone brings the lands into better compliance with that of the official plan. There are no concerns with the additional permitted uses. And a lot of these additional permitted uses are permitted in the nearby Main Street overlay area. So although this isn't part of that area, just kind of an extension of where those uses are allowed is supportable. The site layout. So I'll note that the options are relatively limited when trying to propose a 10-story mixed-use building on a lot of this size, while also having to consider the required 14-meter MTO setback. So no development can happen in this area, just for potential future expansion of the highway. So the reduction in the front yard setback, it allows the building to be as close to the street as possible. It also allows the at-grade parking to be in the rear of the building. So kind of at the bottom of the screen being shown, while still being respectful of that 14-meter MTO setback. The parking is appropriately located on the site, underground in the side or rear yards, or being screened by various architectural features. And then the proposed increased building width is really to recuperate some of that lost lot depth because of the 14-meter setback. Design compatibility. So the official plan policies that were circulated, planning staff are of the opinion that they're complied with through like an articulated facade with various colors, materials, and windows that display high-quality design, are supportive of the front entrance of the building being close to the street, promoting walkability and creating a pedestrian-friendly environment. Also supportive of the design that any mechanical equipment is appropriately screened. So for parking, so again, the standardized parking rate, so 1.5 spaces per residential unit inclusive of visitor parking, and 1 space for every 28 square meters of employment generating gross floor area. So on this site, I'll just note that there are contributing spots and there are non-contributing spots. So the spot has to be considered non-contributing to any like required number through either required in the zoning bylaw or as proposed if they're within the 14-meter MTO setback. So there's a total of 250 contributing parking spaces proposed. That's broken down. 181 is derived by the residential standard, the 1.5 spaces per unit, and 69 are derived from the employment generating standard. So that's equaling the 250 required parking spaces. The intent of standardizing this parking is to permit a variety of tenancy options without having parking requirements and ratios be a barrier to leasing the units in the building. Standard ratios, they remove the need for minor variances when different types of uses lease in the building. And then there's 29 additional non-contributing parking spaces that are proposed, which really does bring the application in excess of the required parking. So on the image on the left, that row of parking at the bottom of the plan, that whole row is in the MTO setback. So they can still have parking there. They just can't contribute to what's required by the bylaw. So there is those 29 extra spaces, bringing the proposal up to a 279 total parking spaces. And then just to touch on accessible parking, 12 accessible parking spaces are proposed. In addition, there's one non-contributing spot. Based on the parking ratios in the zoning bylaw, 13 accessible parking spaces would have been required, but the applicants have requested a site-specific policy to reduce that to 12 contributing spaces. But again, there's that extra non-contributing accessible parking space. And planning staff are supportive of this because when comparing it with the Ontario or Accessibility for Ontario with Disabilities Act, under their requirements for a parking lot with 250 contributing spaces, only 7 spaces would be required to be accessible. So planning staff believe that this application is in excess of the minimum accessible parking spaces that would be required. There's also 57 bicycle spaces. So roads and traffic, just briefly, complies with the official plan policies. It's on an open and improved public roadway with year-round access. The movement of oversized vehicles would be similar to those of other mixed-use developments in the area, so such as 13 Windward. Across the street has been developed since this aerial photography has been taken. It really wouldn't change the makeup of any oversized vehicles in the area. So this application would also be subject to site plan control. So in section 9.76, the goals of the site plan process are outlined, and this includes detailed review of items such as lighting, grading, drainage, servicing, landscaping, streetscape, etc. I believe those were included in the report circulated with the agenda. So for the staff recommendation, planning staff are supportive of the OPA and ZBA as explained in the report and this presentation. So we recommend that the bylaws for the OPA and ZBA be recommended for approval. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Michaela. So what we'll do, committee, is we'll have the consultant presentation and then ask questions after both presentations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mayor Jordan, members of committee. My name is Oz Kamal. I'm a partner at MHBC Planning. We're the agents for the application at 9 Windward. We prepared a presentation. The agenda is on the screen. I do note that Michaela covered a lot of what we were going to cover, so I don't want it to be repetitive, so I might jump slides quickly. So the first slide, site location, that was already covered, so I think we can skip that. This is just showing you some area context, and I was here just last week. Actually, I wanted to, after coming a couple of times for a site visit and walking that area, I actually went to the, is it Lang on the Water, the Thai restaurant there? It was really nice, and I walked with the neighborhood just to kind of get a feel for it. I really do feel like what we're proposing today is going to fit with that whole character of the, and the really interesting vibe that you get from walking down with the mix of uses that you see. So to the north, opposite Windward Drive, there's a mixed-use development currently under construction. To the east, you have the four-story hotel, and beyond that, there's the office building with some new residential development. To the south, obviously, is the QEW, and there are commercial and employment uses such as car dealerships and industrial buildings on the other side. And then to the west, you have one-story commercial plaza. That's the Harveys and the Tims, which just revamped, it looks like, so that's good to see. And some lower density residential and mixed-use development on the opposite side of North Service Road. Next slide, please. Just, again, with additional context, just what's happening in the immediate area. So the number one is 4 Windward Drive. This is slightly northwest of the subject lands. The development was approved in 2021 and contains two mixed-use podium-style developments at 12 and 19 stories, and townhouse units and permissions for hotel and commercial uses as well. The number 2, immediately across the street from our site, which is the Flag. The number 2 is 10 Windward Drive. It's located directly opposite, and it's currently nearing completion. The development contains a 20-story residential building with 206 units, as well as 27 townhouses along the perimeter of the site with some ground floor commercial uses. And the number 3 to the east is 13 Windward Drive, and it is fully built out. That development consists of a 5-story office building abutting the QE and 3 residential buildings in behind it, ranging from 4 to 10 stories. Next slide, please. This is our process to date. Again, Michaela covered this. We've been working comprehensively, kind of hand in hand with town staff on this application. So we're pleased to see that we were able to get through the process and see a positive staff report issued for Planning and Development Committee today. Next slide, please. Just high-level overview, as Michaela pointed out, it's a 10-story mixed-use building. The idea is that there's 121 residential units and 1,926 square meters of employment commercial units on the first 2 floors with a total lot coverage of about 45%. We worked with staff to determine the appropriate amount of employment commercial based on that employment overlay, which helped guide us with respect to our application, asking that we be allowed additional residential units on top. Next slide, please. Due to the property's adjacency to the QEW, as Michaela had pointed out, there's a 14-meter MTO setback requirement, and that's located along the rear property, or paper south, as you see there. And what we did there is you're not allowed to have any structures or contributing parking spaces, as Michaela had pointed out. So what we did is we made sure that the site itself, without that 14 meters, has enough drive aisle, has enough parking, and then what we did is we used that south piece for additional surface parking, which if they ever widen the QEW and need that 14 meters, they could take that away, and we're still compliant with everything. Next slide, please. These are the designations. Again, Michaela talked about these already. So the amendment, I'll just skip to the last point. The amendment is to amend policy 11332H, and it's to permit residential uses within the employment overlay in the Winston Road neighborhood secondary plan. So you're already allowed mixed use high density, but with that employment overlay, it almost puts a blanket on you, almost like a fire blanket to like stop you from growing. And so what we did is we worked with staff to come up with the appropriate balance. So, which is why we necessitated the official plan amendment application. Next slide, please. With respect to the zoning bylaw amendment, I'll spend a little bit of time here just in order to just make sure everyone understands the details. So the lands are subject to Town Zoning Bylaw 14-45, which zone the lands as neighborhood development. That doesn't permit any new development to occur. Neighborhood development zone is a zone that's just recognizing existing uses, and at the time it was a model sales home center, so that's all you would be permitted. So we would have needed an amendment regardless of whether it would have been any type of other use. So the zoning bylaw amendment being recommended for approval amends the site's zoning to comply with the official plan and recommends a mixed-use high-density zone with site-specific provisions. So within the mixed-use high-density zone, it includes a variety of uses, including residential, commercial, and prestige employment uses, all permitted. In order to ensure long-term viability of the employment and commercial units, we asked for a couple of additional units that we had asked for as site-specific with this amendment. Those site-specific additional uses included accessory showroom, clinic, convenience store up to 464 square meters, a fitness studio, a food store up to 464 square meters, a pharmacy, and then recognizing the OP policies for having living and working in the same area, we also asked for additional live-work units be added as permitted uses. Next slide, please. So in terms of the specific zoning bylaw amendment adjustments that we had requested, there was 6 site-specific zoning provisions that had been applied for in order to accommodate the proposed mixed-use development. So the first one was the reduction in the minimum front yard. The bylaw requires a 2-meter. We asked for a 1-meter to accommodate some architectural pillars located on the front facade. These pillars have been incorporated to enhance the facade along with the Windward Drive streetscape, and the remainder of the building will be set back from the pillars to create depth and canopied entranceways. The other provision that we asked for was an increase in the building width from 60 meters to 72 meters, so an increase of 12 meters, and that was to account for the reduction in the usable lot area as a result of the MTO's 14-meter setback at the rear of the property. So we couldn't go as deep, so we requested to go a little bit longer because we had the width of it within the site. And then the streetscape facade would be architecturally enhanced through fenestration and step backs to minimize the overall impact on the street. The third thing we requested is a standardized parking rate of 1 parking space per 28 square meters of GFA dedicated to employment commercial uses and 1.5 spaces per residential or live-work unit. This is inclusive of visitor parking, and that amendment will ensure that regardless of the use, there's a consistent rate being provided for the development. So if it changes from one type of use to another, you don't have to come back and keep coming back for additional adjustments to parking. Another thing that we asked for was a minor reduction to the required number of accessible parking spaces from 13 to 12 conforming parking spaces. We do have 2 additional accessible parking spaces in the MTO right-of-way, so technically we do have 14, but they would have to be non-contributing parking, but they are there, so when the development does get built in the near future, it would have 14 accessible parking spaces, but should the MTO come in and need a widening and take out that 14, then we would have 12, which is why we're asking for 12. As Michaela had pointed out, we are working with staff. It looks like we don't necessarily need those, the additional modifications. So we originally had 6. I think we might be down to 4 mods if we don't need the underground parking provisions. So we don't believe that those will be required based on how the bylaw is worded with respect to reduced setbacks for the underground parking garage. Next slide, please. Again, these are the conceptual renderings. Michaela, I think you stole them from our presentation. So these are the 2 conceptual renderings of the proposed development taken from the southeast corner of the lot and from 4 Windward Drive. The design is subject to change, but this is just to give you a feel for what the renderings could look like for this building, and this will all be subject to site plan approval as well, so we'll have to come in for a site plan approval, and that's where the details and the look and feel of the building will be further fleshed out. And last slide. That's it. Questions and comments. Sorry, I went through it kind of quickly, but Michaela was very thorough in her presentation, and I didn't want to bore you with a repetitive presentation.
Thank you for your presentation, Oz. Member Drew.
Thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Michaela, for your presentation as well. Overall, this plan appears to satisfy the town's desire for intensification on residential areas, as well as providing employment opportunity and employment area. So those are very positive aspects. Wanted to comment and related particularly to the MTO setback and the implications, and certainly I recognize that you've had to make building modifications for a wider building as a result of that, and that's built into the proposal, and so that's created some challenges for you. But I want to emphasize the parking aspect of that, which you've both outlined, which is that 250 parking spaces are required by the criteria that was set out. But with the MTO setback area, it did provide you space for an additional 29 parking spaces. So for the benefit of the overall project, for the residents, for the long term, for the business opportunities that presents, that's more than a 10% increase in overall parking. So the setback itself created challenges, but it also in the long term has created a situation where you've got additional parking, which is clearly going to be beneficial. I also want to congratulate you on the accessibility aspect of that parking, that in the initial stages, including the setback, that you're at 14, where the requirement is only 7. So I congratulate you on that. Thank you.
Councillor Frake.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Thank you for the presentation. Good to see you again. Thank you, Michaela. Comments and questions. I got all kinds of little notes here. First of all, can you go back to slide 10 in your deck? It's the one which lists the types of businesses you're suggesting.
Oh, sorry.
Slide
10.
Slide 10. I think it's slide 10. It looks like it, yeah. Can you put it in? Can you blow it up a bit?
Oh.
There. Yeah, I just wanted to ask you. You were very specific on the types of retail and commercial, whatever types of businesses you would like to have in the building. Have you, because you were so specific, I have to ask you the question. Have you identified, do you have actually tenants that would open those types of facilities?
And through you, Mr. Mayor, the MHD zone actually permits a wide variety of retail uses, but these ones that are in the bylaw were not identified in that zone. So I've asked for these in addition to all the other retail uses that are there. So it's not that I'm only asking for these. There's a whole, there's quite the list.
Right.
It's just that we noticed that there was a couple that were missing, and our client was saying that he would be interested in trying to pursue some of these tenants specifically. So maybe you get like a small food store, maybe you get a small convenience store, maybe, you know, like a small fitness studio, like an Orange Theory or something like that,
right.
Where it's more of a studio class. That's why we added those uses in, and staff looked at it and reviewed it and thought, yeah, no, that makes sense, in addition to all the other retail uses.
No, it's a great mixture of types of services for sure, and hopefully you can get them all in there.
Yeah, we're hoping.
Yeah, and when you mention additional use added, you talk to that, is that like a daycare center or something like that? Or?
Live work, I would equate it more to maybe like it could be like a hair salon, maybe like more like a personal service type of thing.
Okay.
And what it would be is, it could potentially, if we're able to get them as live-work units, it could be a unit where somebody lives, but maybe like they use a bedroom for, cutting hair or something like that. So it might actually generate more jobs. So it might actually increase that percentage of employment commercial over and above what we already anticipate on the first 2 floors.
Because daycare centers in town are at a premium at this moment. Would that be something you consider to go in there? Because in great demand, and I know there's a shortage of supply in this town. I'm not suggesting you make any commitment to me here. I'm just throwing it out at you.
No, I mean, I think that's great. If Michaela, I think, is quickly searching to see if daycare is already a permitted use under the MHD zone. It might already be there. I'm not 100% sure if that's one of them. I'm guessing it's not, but yeah, I didn't think it was. And one of the...
While she's looking,
one of the things, daycare wasn't specifically... Sorry, 1 second. One of the things with the daycare nursery or daycare center is that you have to comply to the Daycare Centers or Daycare Nursery Act. And in that act, it requires that you have a specific amount of outdoor play area.
My colleague just told me that.
Oh, yeah. So you have to have a specific amount, and it's 5.6, I've done a few of them, 5.6 square meters per child. And then it has to be fenced in, it has to be rubberized playground. I've gotten into it.
Enough said.
Yeah,
Okay.
there's a whole thing to it. So
I was just curious. Okay. I don't know enough about these things.
Yeah, no problem.
But, okay, thank you for that. The facade of the building, the external look at the building, is that what you showed on the screen a moment ago? Is that what it's going to look like, or is that just...
It's a conceptual rendering of what it could look like. When we go through the next application, which will be site plan, then it'll be better refined in terms of what we're just trying to show you is that this is a building that we anticipate with mixed use. So you're seeing those taller, the ground floor plane is a bit taller. And I mean, we've identified conceptually colors and things of that nature. But when we go into the site plan application, that's where staff really get a kick at the can at it. And we'll work with staff to make sure that we're providing the best building we can for Grimsby.
Yeah, that's the reason why I asked, because the location that you're in is almost a signature location.
Yeah,
in terms of the space. So it's going to be seen by every single person that drives to QEW. And it's also, indicative of what Grimsby looks like. So I hope that it'll be the nicest facade or external view of any of the buildings down there. A little challenge for you.
Agreed. And I think that'll help us with tenancies too.
Yeah. I have to commend you on your parking. I mean, you're one of the few developers that have come with ample, or, you've applied to you've accommodated the bylaw, but also you've gone beyond that. And I suppose the MTO setback has helped you a little on that one.
A little bit.
Yeah, but you mentioned that it could go away if the MTO decided to expand to QEW, so.
Yeah, one of the things that at the very beginning of the process, I was talking with Walter about it, and he said, listen, if you can provide good parking here, because this is Grimsby, it's not downtown Toronto, and people do drive. And it's a fair point, and so what we did is we did our comprehensive traffic study that was submitted with the application, figured out what was the peak period of parking, and then we made sure that we were above and beyond that on our site alone, not including the MTO, and then the MTO was above and beyond that.
Okay. Without hogging the show here, because you're so close to the QEW, what's your plans to kind of reduce the noise from the QEW? Is there some plan of like a noise barrier or something? I mean, because it's going to be quite noisy as you drive along that. If you're living in the building and that particular area, right up against the QEW.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And one of the things that we're anticipating is that we will, like through the rezoning, we needed to submit a noise impact study, and we had determined that there will be some sort of acoustical barrier required on that QEW facing side.
Right.
What we did is we've tried to design it in a way that it's not overly, you don't want to just see a noise wall, right? So what we've done is just, in our preliminary designs, tried to marry having a nice design, recognizing that we need a noise barrier. And again, that's one of those things that'll be further flushed out through the site plan control process.
Okay. And back to parking for a minute. You're creating underground parking. Is that all of the residents would park underground? I assume, just looking at the plan, that is your plan. It's all the residential parking is underground.
I think the intent is that the residents would be able to park underground. They would all have parking underground, and then most of the surface, if not almost all the surface, would be visitor and commercial parking.
Okay. I think that's all I had. Oh, green. I made a note here, green. Green as in, I see you've planted a few trees on your slides, but you're going to plant a few trees in the parking lot as well?
Yeah, the idea.
What's your plan for giving us the green effect?
Yeah, so through the site plan process, then the green effect, I like that. We'll be required to do a detailed landscape plan, and that'll have plantings, trees, species, as well as other additional plantings, not just trees. So it'll be greened up, if you will.
Yeah.
And then but that gets all flushed out through the site plan process. This is really more so that we just wanted to give you a bit of context in what it could look like, and getting that building form kind of set from a zoning parameter. So the next step would be looking at the details of the building itself and the facades, and then also the site itself, and making sure that we're providing appropriate landscaping and whatnot to make it an attractive place.
And on the same line, thinking, in the building itself, are you going to be using any kind of green technology or green net zero materials? Or I probably should let you ask that question, Ian, because you're.
I know.
With the big push now towards net zero, that type of thing, are you using any materials or going to be using any materials, or designing the building in such a way that it will look at those types of things?
The architect's here, but I know from in discussions with him, I know that we're using higher insulation ratings. We're going to have extensive landscaping like we talked about. We're intending that the parking surface is a low albedo surface. We expect to have water retention on site, and that hopefully will be reused maybe for watering plants and things of that nature. So we're working on a bunch of different things, but again, once we know that we've got the zoning and land use established, then we take it to the next level of detailed design, and that's where we'll really start flushing that stuff out through site plan process.
Okay. I think that's it for me. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
All right, up next, we have Councillor Bradsey, then Member Potter.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. I just wanted to touch back to the last time we spoke. I know the facade of the building can still change at the site plan approval stage, but one of the councilors said to ask if you had any inclination in changing the design to include balconies for the units, and I just wanted to ask if that was still in your thoughts.
We heard that at the public meeting. We've taken it back. We've had discussions. We haven't landed yet on whether we'll have balconies or not. I know the zoning allows for balconies. It's still to be designed and to be determined.
Okay. It's kind of just feels like a hotel vibe to me without the balconies. But also, I kind of wanted to touch to that slide 10 that Councillor Freak was talking about with the live-work units. Would that be something that's permitted in, say, a two-bedroom condo unit, where, like you said, maybe potentially some person could live in one unit and use the second bedroom as a business, per se, of the...
Yeah, the live-work unit, actually, Councillor, I think it comes from some of your comments previously where you were asking, like, is there more, could you do something more to get more commercial or employment uses in here? So this was kind of us trying to strike a balance of your comment, because it didn't go without notice. So what we're thinking is that, yeah, you would potentially have units where there may be multiple bedrooms, like a two-bedroom unit. One bedroom is maybe used as a normal bedroom would be, and then the other bedroom might be used as a unit for whatever service commercial type of use we could get in that unit.
That's awesome. I like that, Oz. That's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Potter.
Thank you, and thank you both for the presentations, very informative. Firstly, it was a comprehensive package. I like the aesthetics of the building, it looks good I'm not sure about the balconies, but, there it goes. A couple of comments and then some questions maybe. Sort of Councillor Freak's questions. On the extension you've requested with use with regard to salons and grocery stores and all that sort of thing, I'd suggest your client does some more due diligence on that. I'd say within 300 meters of that building, you've got all of those, and density-wise, there's a yoga studio across the road, there's a small convenience store across the road. Can you accept that? Now, having said that, it's a very high-density area coming, and also with proposals for east of Casablanca there, even more. So just a comment more than anything. But I worry about, one shop looks exactly the same as the next shop, and how does that diversification happen?
So it's just to make sure that we have a full suite of potential users, that's all.
Yeah, that's fine. Just observation more than
Thank
anything.
you. Yeah.
The parking, I like what I see, but I also park down that area quite often because it's a lovely area to visit. Langs is a nice place to visit, for example. So you're very specific in the words, and I'm not sure about the exact definitions of words, but you used about the word visitor parking. Now, I'm not sure if visitor parking relates to you're visiting a friend in a condo, or you're actually a customer for one of the proposed shops in here. If you're the latter, I don't see the parking. Most of the time we'll be on streetscape, that sort of thing. So is that included as a customer to visit these shops that are in the basement, or is that separate?
So the way that we've envisioned it is the parking around the perimeter of the site on the surface would be for visitor, if you were visiting somebody in the condo or apartment, or if you were going to, if we were lucky and got a restaurant with a patio, or you were going there, you could park in that area as well.
Okay, so if that MTO setback was taken, there would be a lack of customer parking for those shops potentially.
What we did is, when we did our traffic study and we assumed at peak hours, that's what you do as a traffic study. And what we had figured out is the peak for this site would be in the evening, and in the evening, the peak would be approximately 216 spaces.
Okay.
So we're 250, not including the MTO, and with the MTO, you've got another 29 spaces. So we think we have that covered in this instance.
So that assumes public access to the underground garage as well?
The underground parking is primarily for the residents, is how we see it.
All right.
I don't know if we had visitors, like guests, in the underground garage. Maybe that's something that we can flesh out at site plan, but but I think that based on when you look at the peak demand versus what we're providing, and it's very rare for us. Usually if it says 216, we're at 217, and in this case, we're at 250 because we were able to make it work. So I'm actually quite proud of the parking.
No, I'm good. I just wanted clarity more than anything. I worry about what I would call the customer parking for the shops around there in general. I know there's some at Winston and next door, where the new Timmy's is.
I had to park down the street and walk about a block and a half to get to the restaurant.
You should be there on a summer sunny day.
I can't even imagine how busy it would be.
The urban landscaping, I know you said it was in the next phase of the site planning, because of the proximity to the MTO. I suggest strongly working with the town staff on selection of trees species, because it is a hardier environment with all the traffic and I won't use the word pollution, but it's pollution effectively off the road. Just making sure you get the right selection, not just what the landscaper gives you. The other thing, maybe for the town more than McKenna, if that's okay. So this is becoming a very high density space with what's there today and what's just been opened, I guess, with the taller building and the east side of Casablanca proposal, Lozani proposal. The traffic study, did that include that future growth, or is it just today? The sewer system, is there capacity in the sewer system to accept this building and the others without significant upgrades to the sewer? And from a fire safety perspective, is this still an accepted density of buildings with the capabilities of the existing Lincoln Grimsby Fire Department. So I know there's 3 questions, but I just worry a little bit about capacity today and in the future, and we're not on the hook for, we've got to put a new sewer system in because it's not big enough.
That's fair. Why don't I start? Maybe Michaela, you could jump in. So one of the other reports that we had to do in order to justify the height. So the other thing to keep in mind here, residential mixed-use high density, you're technically allowed 12 stories. We looked at it and thought, well, you have like behind the QE, like taller buildings, and we thought 10-story was the right balance coming towards the QE. And what we did is a functional servicing report that looked at having the 2 floors of commercial employment plus the residential above it. It didn't show anything where there was a significant concern with respect to servicing from that perspective. I know through the site plan process, again, fire will have a kick at the can at it as well, but I believe because this whole area is intended for intensification, I believe that there would be adequate capacity for fire services and taking into account other applications that you're getting, because this is the area where you want to see growth.
Okay. Yeah, I worry a little bit about sewer systems because, we're all into low water flush toilets now, and the drains weren't designed for that. So just getting mobility of solids, just making sure that our existing system can accommodate that sort of thing. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bradzi.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, I just had one more question regarding the additional permitted uses. Just in additional parking, how many parking spaces would these uses additionally be causing us? I don't know if Walter, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor. It's all based on the ratio of the floor space. So the amount of floor space that's being provided for employment generating uses, it's 1 space for every 28 square meters of gross floor area of the employment generating floor space. So it's not that there would be additional floor space to accommodate the uses. It would be additional uses to fill the floor space that's being provided. So what's being proposed is essentially a floor space ratio that's sort of the average of all of the types of uses that would be, and the requirements for the different types of uses that would be permitted on the site. And we feel that it's an appropriate ratio to be used.
Okay. I was kind of thinking if like a fitness studio per se, where it's show up for an hour class, 30 people come, would we be able to handle that type of influx? That's all.
Go ahead.
I thought it was rhetorical. To Walter's point, Councillor, I think the 1 per 28 ratio is a fair ratio to use here. We did look at it when we did the traffic study, the parking study, just to make sure that the ratios made sense. And we, like for instance, if you did get a fitness studio here that had 30 people in the fitness studio, which, I mean, I go to a Good Life gym. I lie, I don't go to the Good Life gym, but when I do go, I've never seen 30 people in there at one time. So you don't look like this and go to the gym every day. So but I do think that the parking there, to getting back to your question, I think the parking here, because we're providing above and beyond what the peak hours is, and at the peak, if you assumed like 30 people at a fitness studio, given the limitations on like the ground floor space, I think you would find that there is adequate parking here. Thank you.
All right, seeing no further questions, thank you for your presentation. I'll read the resolution.
Oh, Councillor DeFlavio has his hand up. He's not on the committee, but he has his hand up.
Councillor DeFlavio.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a question. So we've had concerns in other areas of Grimsby where, the parking has been, we've had discussions about parking at the site plan level, and then later on, when the actual use occurs, the way that the parking is allocated by the condominium corporation changes. I'm just, for staff, is there a way to ensure that the parking is properly distributed here? Parking has been a recurring issue, and I'm perfectly satisfied with the amount of parking. I think it's terrific. I just want to make sure that when the actual use occurs, that it looks the same way that we've talked about here tonight, and that is, the MTO land, that there's adequate surface parking for commercial use, that remains commercial parking, and that it's not parking that's going to be sold to condo owners there. Is there a way to put that in writing in a legal way to ensure that is ongoing and permanent? I don't know if that's something that can be done by staff. I commend the developer for what they've done, but once it leaves their hands, we've had issues in the past, and I want to make sure that those issues don't come up again.
Yes, through you, Chair, or Mr. Mayor, the condominium application, once it comes forward, just as the units are parcelized, the parking units are also parcelized. So through the condominium application process, will be the standard condominium process, if that's the way the developer chooses to go. Again, specifically, the spaces that are to be sold are and have to be identified, and the spaces that are to be used for visitors and for customers of the commercial units, as well as the units that are, or parking spaces that are sold to the commercial unit owners also. In addition to that, they have to be identified on the condominium plan. So, and in Grimsby, the condominium approval process is still the purview of council. So this is something that would be brought forward once the development is at an appropriate stage to submit a condominium application. And then staff and council will have an opportunity to specifically address how the parking spaces are assigned. And once it's registered, that's the way it is.
Thanks, Walter. The other thing that I wanted to mention, Chair, through you, is I like the variety of uses as far as commercial is concerned. Well, the last thing we want, I think, from a municipal perspective and from a residential perspective down there, is vacant commercial. And the more flexible we can be, while obviously keeping in mind that we have other areas of town with commercial that we want to protect, but the more flexible we can be, the better, I think. It's not just good for the developer, it's good for the town, because vacant commercial doesn't benefit anybody. We want a vibrant area that is filled with commercial uses. So whatever we can do to promote that, I think, is important. Thanks, Chair. I appreciate the ability, you giving me the chance to speak.
Thank you. That seems to be the end of questions. And now I'll read the resolution. Moved by Member Drew, second by Member Potter. Resolved that report PA 2319, applications for official plan amendment OP or 26 OP 16-2204 and zoning bylaw amendment 26Z-16-2205 at 9 Windward Drive dated June 6, 2023 be received. And the draft official plan amendment attached to the report as Appendix B recommended for approval, and that the draft zoning bylaw amendment attached to the report as Appendix C be recommended for approval. All in favor? That's carried. All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Michaela. Up next, we have report PA 2322. Adam, welcome.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Jordan. So just to introduce this application, I have a brief presentation essentially highlighting some of the components of the report PA 23-2022. Yep. Again, this is for the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 41 Livingston Avenue. Just in addition to myself, we also have Kathy Turner here from Community Living and sorry, I'm blanking, Ryan Ferrari from AJ Clark and Associates, here to also answer any questions or offer some points of clarification as well. So just moving on to this proposed development here, what is being proposed is a 2.5-story mixed-use building containing an education resource center for the benefit of community living. So there's approximately 40 square meters of outdoor amenity space provided at grade, along with additional recreational space provided in the basement of the proposed building. The ground floor is intended to operate in accordance with the existing education and learning center, and then there would also be space for offices on the ground floor. The second and third stories would contain 5 residential units. These would be units for those for specialized housing needs. And there's also 9 parking spaces incorporated, proposed for the site, one of which is an accessible parking space as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to go over the official plan, existing designation and proposed designation. So the existing designation on the site is low-density residential area. So this designation permits a mixture of residential uses, including single detached dwellings and community facilities. And this neighborhood is considered a stable residential neighborhood, but does allow for some limited development, evolution, and rejuvenation. And the proposed designation is medium density residential area. This is due to the density increasing beyond the maximum 25 units per hectare of the low density residential area. So this medium density residential area permits townhomes and other forms of multiple unit ground related housing, low-rise apartments and group homes. The amendment does also propose to add a facility for specialized housing needs at 41 Livingston Avenue as a permitted use. I'll go into the definition of this use in just a moment. So just to go through the zoning bylaw, so the existing zoning is residential detached 2 or RD225, permitting a range of residential uses and a 25% maximum lot coverage. The proposed zoning is a modified residential detached 2 zone with the maximum lot coverage increasing to 26%. So in addition to that, there is an existing site-specific provision, site-specific policy 183, that is in effect on the site. The existing provision permits the Education Resource Center on the ground floor, as well as 3 parking spaces in tandem parking form on the existing site in the existing driveway. This modified zoning bylaw is also proposing to repeal the existing 183 site-specific provision and replace it with an updated site-specific provision with the same number. So again, this would permit the facility for specialized housing needs. In accordance with the definition, any housing including dedicated facilities in whole or in part that is used by people who have specific needs beyond economic needs, including but not limited to needs such as mobility requirements or support functions required for daily living. The facility may have accessory offices that are subordinate to the primary use. So in addition to that, there are site-specific provisions needed for the parking requirements. The parking requirements based on the requirements of the zoning bylaw would be 13 parking spaces. 9 parking spaces are being requested. There's also provisions for the rear yard, location of a parking area to the rear yard of a residential zone with a minimum of 0.9 meters requested. The size of the accessible parking stall requested to be a minimum of 3.4 meters wide by 5.8 meters long. This is in accordance with the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AOTA requirements. The zoning requirements are a 4.5 meter wide by 5.75 meter long parking space. So this would essentially bring it within AOTA compliance. The Education Resource Center permitted on the ground floor is proposed to be maintained. And then there are also provisions for maximum building height, an increase from 9.0 meters to 9.5 meters. and also provisions for maximum lot coverage of 26%, minimum front yard setback for 5.0 meters, minimum lot frontage of 20 meters, and a minimum setback from the hypotenuse of the daylighting triangle for 1.2 meters. This is to accommodate a requested 10 by 10 meter daylighting triangle and road widening of 3 meters from the region. So just to walk everyone through the planning process and what's happened already. So we did have a pre-consultation meeting for this project late last summer. Eventually the application was submitted late in December and was deemed complete shortly thereafter. And it was circulated for public and technical review in early January. So we did previously have an open house and a public meeting for this project on January 30th and April 19th respectively. Some comments were brought up at the open house and public meeting that I will go over briefly in just a moment. Following each of these meetings, there were analysis and done by planning staff and revisions made by the applicants at the request of planning staff. And we're currently at the stage of the staff recommendation report, which is being heard right now, with a potential council decision being heard shortly after. So just to go through the comments quickly, these are the summary of comments from both agencies and that were brought up at the open house and the public meeting. So a lot of the comments were related to parking. How was the number of spaces determined exactly? This was directed towards the applicant team. So the parking was determined or requested to be 9 parking spaces down from a requirement of 13 from the zoning bylaw amendment. Again, there was also concerns about the intersection of Livingston Avenue and Kidd Avenue in regards to traffic and employees crossing, because immediately across from the site is the plaza with the Canadian Tire and some other retail and restaurant uses. So there is traffic moving in and out of the site. And there was particular concern about left-hand turns coming out of that plaza, specifically in regards to employee safety. There was also comments about or questions about the number of staff that would be on the site at the time, again, directed to the applicant team. And planning staff, after the first submission and the open house, had requested a meeting with the applicant team to define or come up with a more concise definition of what the exact use is that is being proposed for the property and is currently existing on the property. In part, determining it as a facility for specialized housing needs in accordance with the definition I had read off shortly ago. Originally, this proposal was identified as group home, both in the planning justification report and most of the submission package by the applicants. Planning staff just wanted to have a more concise definition because it didn't quite fit the definition of a group home. Next slide, please. So just looking at an analysis, planning staff have reviewed the application. So it does align with the principles of controlled growth, providing efficient development and land use patterns, and is appropriate intensification. Staff are of the opinion that the proposed use and building would fit in with the established character of the surrounding area and is compatible with some of the adjacent lots and development along Kidd Avenue and Livingston Avenue. So on the reduction of the parking spaces to 9 total parking spaces, down from 13 as required by the zoning bylaw, staff have determined that that is reasonable, as most of the parking requirement comes from the number of units that are being proposed. So the 5 units would require a total parking requirement of 7.5 spaces, inclusive of visitor parking. The applicant team did note at the previous public meeting and open house that most of the occupants of these units would not be driving, and that most of the parking would instead be used for employee purposes and for the occasional visitor to the site. So staff did feel, given that information, that the 9 total parking spaces were appropriate in this situation. And again, planning staff are of the opinion that the requested setbacks are appropriate to accommodate for, again, the requested daylighting triangle. This was from the region, and the road widening, and that privacy is being maintained with the adjacent properties to the south and the east, which are made up of more residential uses as well. So just to conclude with the staff recommendations, staff recommend that report PA 2322 regarding the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications at 41 Livingston Avenue, dated June 6, 2023, be received. That the draft OPA attached to report PA 2322 as Appendix B be submitted to council for approval. And that the draft bylaw attached to report PA 23-2020 or 22 as Appendix C be submitted to council for approval. Thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation, Adam. Ryan, welcome.
Is this thing on? There we go. Okay, thank you, Mayor and members of committee. For those who don't know, my name is Ryan Ferrari. I'm the authorized agent for the applicant, who is Community Living Grimsby, Lincoln, and West Lincoln, who is the proponent of this project. I do have a presentation prepared. I wasn't going to refer to it unless necessary, but I'm more than happy to give it to Madam Clerk if we need to look at some drawings and whatnot. What I did want to speak to the committee about today, and I think the first thing I should say is thank Adam and Walter for expeditiously processing this application and working with us through this process. Just to fill in some blanks for the committee here, what Community Living does is they offer services for adults who live with special needs and accessibility needs. So that's their core sort of clientele. They own this building on the property at 41 Livingston, and to date it's sort of been used as a bit of a community hub for them. They would host events there and do anything that they need to do. They would host activities with the folks that they serve. You know, sometimes they go to the grocery store and bring groceries back and cook a meal and eat it together. So that's sort of the function of the building as it is today. So what Community Living's desire to do is to build, in order to service their clientele, what we are calling, in accordance with staff, a facility for specialized housing needs. So what exactly do we mean by this? So what will be provided are 5 dwelling units, okay? And in terms of the clientele that will serve, they will be adults who they could have an accessibility need or some sort of a special need, like an adult living with potentially not necessarily mental health issues, but just learning disabilities and things of that nature, okay? So these 5 units are going to operate independently. So their clientele would be able to live there, but there would also be support staff on site in case they need any help, perhaps maybe getting around town, going to the grocery store, doing things of that nature. Okay, so that's the proposed use in the building. In terms of staffing needs, I know Adam touched on this previously, so what I want to impress upon this committee is this isn't this type of building where staff, all of them show up at 9 o'clock, they stay there all day, and then they leave at 5 o'clock. That's not what Community Living does. They're out and about in the community because they have clientele who may live at other places, at other people's homes. So at no time will you see everybody kind of piling in there at 9 o'clock in the morning. They're sort of all over the place and moving around. And again, just to touch on what Adam noted about parking, we are requesting a reduction, but these folks that Community Living will be serving, they don't drive. So effectively, even though the zoning bylaw recognizes that, we need a parking space for a residential unit. In this case, these folks simply aren't going to have vehicles. So that raises the question of transportation. So Community Living does offer like a shuttle service, although Kathy can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure they like to stay local, but there will be like a van on site in case they're going on trips or taking them to appointments and things of that nature. And so, you know, in our opinion, we feel that the parking requirement's appropriate. It was chosen by Community Living. Community Living intends to operate on this site for a long time. They're not going to be moving around. And so this parking rate really is specific to the use. And that's why we made the use as specific as it did with staff in order to recognize, you know, the special consideration for this type of facility. The other thing I wanted to note for this committee is with respect to the parking rate, there were some concerns raised about staff parking across the street. There's a large commercial mall across the street. This development here is intending to end that practice once and for all. The 9 parking spaces are going to accommodate the staff that are on site. and they won't be there at the same time. So we're confident that the parking rate provided is appropriate for the use. One other note I did want to make for the committee. So they will see a number of variances that we're requesting to setbacks and whatnot. A lot of these are because we are being requested a very, very large daylight triangle and road widening in front of this property. So for instance, we're requesting a 5 meter yard setback from the front yard. That includes the road widening. So when we're looking at a 5 meter setback, it's actually really an 8 meter setback from where the property line is today. And same to do with the lot coverage. The reason why we need a lot coverage variance is because we're taking away that 3 meter road widening and the hypotenuse of the daylight triangle. Same thing with the setback from the corner. So really a lot of these variances are in relation to the region's need to take such a large road widening and daylight triangle. I think the last thing that I'd like to note is with respect to the height of the dwelling. So the reason why we need a 0.5 increase in height, or we're requesting that from this committee, is because we do have 2 units on the second floor of the building. The building is designed, and I can pull up some plans if needed, to have a large sloped roof, and sort of to get that height to accommodate the 2 residential units that are on the top floor, we need that small increase in height, and we feel that combined with the large rear yard setback that we provide to the residential uses to the south of us, this is appropriate. So I think I'll leave that there. Like I said, I would like to thank staff for processing the application. We're certainly supportive of the recommendation today. And I'm certainly here to answer anybody's questions or comments. And if I need to, I can pull up that presentation. So thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Ryan, and yours, Adam. Questions or comments from members? Councillor Frake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for bringing this to Grimsby and expanding what you're doing, because there certainly is a great need for this type of assisted living in every town, I'm sure. Just curious, maybe you mentioned this in your spiel there. You said the full-time staff, are they there 24 hours a day? Like, or are they just daytime?
Yeah, so they work in shifts, less staff at night, right? And yeah, during the day. But like I said, it's coming and going. Sometimes there could be 3 people, sometimes there could be 5, sometimes, there's only a couple people there.
You mentioned that currently the facility is used as a community hub. So I assume there's a lot of folks passing through there, meeting there, cooking meals and so on and so forth, as you mentioned. So when you become a full-time live-in facility, will some of that service be taken away from the folks that are not able to come there? Like, it doesn't become a meeting place anymore, or are you taking that away from it?
So Kathy can feel free to come up if she wants to, but I don't think that's the intent at all. The ground floor is intended to remain sort of the same type of use, because there's no residential units on the ground floor, and Kathy can certainly speak to that.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi. So no, it's not going to be a full-time live-in facility. So the 5 individuals who will live there full-time.
Right.
But staff won't be there 24/7.
Okay.
Unless there's a need. If someone has, for example, a surgical procedure and someone needs to be there to monitor overnight, one night or 2 nights or what have you, then they would stay over, and we have a room set aside for that, for staff, for an office with maybe a Murphy bed or something like that. But our staff won't be there 24/7.
So they're there during the day and possibly into the evening, and then
That's
when
right.
everybody's settled down for the night,
They're gone, yeah.
they go.
These are considered supported independent living units. And so currently we have supported independent living individuals who are living scattered across our region.
Okay.
And we just go and visit, take them to their banking, their appointments, and maybe just visit and help them make a meal or what have you. And that's the way we do it now. So that location will be exactly the same as that. It just happens to be all in one spot.
So if one of the live-in folks need overnight assistance, you would arrange for someone to be there for them?
That's right, we'd schedule it.
And they would have a place to stay as well. Is there outdoor space for them to participate, where they can participate outside and backyard type of thing, or?
Yeah, certainly. So we did reserve an amenity space along Kidd Avenue, which will be, have a bit of a fenced-in area and a fountain is what we're proposing. So there is some amenity space there, but again, Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong, there will be excursions, people can go out and whatnot, yeah.
And you mentioned there are 2 live-in spaces that are upstairs. I think it was 2 you said, right?
That's correct. So maybe if I can clarify, so the ground floor is going to remain the same use as it is today.
Right.
So there's small offices for staff, a kitchen, and sort of like I'll call it like a recreational area on the ground floor. The second floor will contain 3 residential units, and the third floor contains 2 residential units.
So I assume that because they have to go upstairs, they cannot be handicapped physically then?
So actually, we did account for that in the design. So the building's fully ADA accessible. We also have an elevator proposed, which kind of owes a little bit to the bulk of the building. So yes, fully accessible.
Okay, all right. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Member Potter.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation, and I think it's commendable the work that this group does, and I agree with the need for communities to have these sort of groups. It's like McNally, we all need to have it. We never know when we're going to need it, but we need to have it. So good for you all. Just one clarification. I've got 3 questions, but one clarity. The existing building that's there, is that going to be ripped down and totally rebuilt, or is it being incorporated into a new build, if you like?
Yeah, through your chair. So we have to demolish the existing building to facilitate the new build, correct?
Okay, so that leads my next question, and maybe a staff question. Is there any heritage value to that building? It doesn't look that old, but I'm not, plus or minus 10 years I could guess, but I don't know if there is a heritage study, because I couldn't find it in the report, if a heritage study had been done on it.
Go ahead.
Sorry, your mic off.
Thank you. To you, Mr. Mayor, there is no heritage value associated with this building, and a heritage study wasn't requested.
Okay, so too many buttons to push. I'm going to come back. It seems to be an evening of parking questions, so I apologize for another parking question. Under what, I can understand where you've gone when the requests and the numbers and everything for where it is today, but unless I'm misunderstanding what is being agreed to by council at the end of the day, there's a broad-based category of what this facility could be used for. So in essence, we're agreeing to all of those uses, as opposed to this one that is, good faith that you're going to execute on this. But if it was to change in the next 5, 10, 15 years, we're already locked into 9 spaces, and the future use may require more. How does that get, and maybe a staff question more than how does that get accommodated? Because you're proving something as a reduction of what the facility could be used for in the future.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. So the existing zoning, the RD2 zoning, is pretty restrictive in terms of its what is permitted on the site. So what is being proposed is essentially would be the most intensive use on the site. Existing uses would essentially be a single detached dwelling with related accessory uses, depending on if that was requested in the future. So this, the parking would just be to accommodate this specific use.
I'm not maybe understanding, because I thought if for the standard proposed, it said 13 parking spaces was the minimum, and then it's been, so I don't quite get your response there.
I see. Yeah, so the rate of parking for requirements is based on a couple of different things. So there is a standard rate for, office space and some of the more public uses. There is also a rate that's included for units within an apartment building, which is what was used. So that rate is 1.5 spaces per unit, inclusive of visitor parking. So that residential portion takes up 7.5 total spaces, in addition to the other uses proposed for the site. So the Educational Resource Center with the also the additional office space required as well. So that's where that 13 comes from. It doesn't, so the permitted uses being requested would essentially be the only uses on the site that would require that kind of parking. Any other use, like a single detached dwelling, would have the baseline requirements.
Member Drew.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. The building design appears to me to be very well suited for the surrounding area and the type of thing that the town is looking for in terms of continued development. It has the type of character that I think we're looking for. The other aspect, which I guess is continuation, but it's certainly beneficial that the access to the site is from off Kidd Avenue versus Livingston. That will, from a traffic standpoint, is beneficial for certain. And certainly, most importantly, thank you for expanding your services in Grimsby.
I see Walter, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, through you, Mayor. Just to provide a little more clarity regarding the parking requirement. Yeah, we'll make sure that the amending bylaw has that parking rate specifically tied to this use, so that if a different use was to occupy the building other than this use, then a planning application and the parking can't be provided in accordance with the minimum standards of the zoning bylaw, then a planning application would have to be made for the town or a committee of adjustment approval.
All right, thank you, Walter. Seeing no further questions, we just need a mover and seconder for the resolution. Moved by Member Potter, second by Councillor Frake. Moved by Member Potter, second by Councillor Frake. Resolved that report PA 23-22 application for official plan amendment 26 OP-16-2203 and zoning bylaw amendment 26Z-16-2203 at 41 Livingston Avenue dated June 6, 2023 be received, and that the draft official plan amendment attached to the report as Appendix B be recommended for approval, and that the draft bylaw attached to the report as Appendix C be recommended for approval. All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Have a good evening. All right, now we move to correspondence. Need a mover and seconder to receive it. Member Drew, Councillor Frake. Any questions from correspondence or comments? Member Potter?
Just one question, because I know the town's in sort of getting into the whole planning process and everything. Was there any surprises in the Niagara population statistical, whatever it is, the census population?
It will get you up eventually.
It was nice to see how much Pelham people get paid compared to Grimsby.
Good evening, Matt.
Good evening, committee. Good question, and through you, Mr. Mayor. No real surprises. Continuations of some of the trends that we were seeing. I think one of the things that I was a little bit surprised by was just the slowing of the progression of aging in the region. You know, we've traditionally been one of those that's been aging or has a mean age that's above a lot of other municipalities. We're still there, but the actual speed at which we're coming to that increased age is slowing. So that's a little bit of a change in direction, but otherwise, you know, one of the key stats that really continues to jump out at me in there is how we are so much higher above everywhere else in our ratio of single detached and semi-detached dwellings. Here we are sitting at what, almost 72, 73%, where the average everywhere else is 58. And again, it just goes to show you what kind of the previous building trends were here based on, you know, or compared to some of the other areas. But in terms of surprises, no, I think a lot of it was just continuation of some of the trends that we'd been seeing in previous years.
Just a little bit of history on that, if I can add, is that I think we had a council that over a long time pushed for single-family homes and nothing else, and I think in some ways it's a little bit coming back to bite us now. So That's just my opinion, but it is the truth.
Yeah, and I think that's and certainly good comments, Mr. Mayor, and I think that's a trend too, that, it wasn't just here, it wasn't just in Grimsby, it was in Lincoln as well, and, other municipalities throughout Niagara, so it wasn't just confined to here, but totally agree with your comments otherwise.
All right, thank you, Matt. We have moved by Member Drew, second by Councillor Frake, resolved that the correspondence from the Niagara Regions and City of St. Catharines be received. All in favor? That's carried. Any other business? Seeing none, our next meeting is scheduled for June 21st, 2023 at 5 p.m. Meeting is adjourned. Good night, everyone. Thank you.